One of the big things in Japanese society as a whole is manners. You're going to see it when you walk through the train stations. There's going to be things like Tokyo Good Manners Project. But this video isn't about the entire society of Japan itself, it's about a very small subsection of that society, which is the Vanguard players. So if you're someone that spent their whole life playing Vanguard in the West, or just in an English-speaking country, or playing Vanguard outside of Japan really, and you're planning to go to Japan and want to play some games of Vanguard, maybe participate in a tournament, this video might just be fairly important to you. One of the things I'm also going to clear up is that a lot of these points are going to be ones that only really apply in Japan, like those that, like the manners that they use, but there's also going to be some manners that they use in Japan that I really enjoyed throughout my 6 months there, and now when I come back to Europe, I really want to see more of them here in the West as well. The last thing before we actually get into the video is I would like to make more of these videos of me talking about the differences between the Japanese way of playing Vanguard and the Western way of playing Vanguard, not just playing but also things like community market and stuff like that. That's actually what I plan to do the next episode on, but I need to hear from you guys if you're actually interested in that kind of thing or not, because obviously if you're not, then there's not much point for me to prioritize this series, and I have other things that I can work on as well. But if you do actually want to know about it, then do let me know in the comments, because I do really appreciate that. So without any further ado, let's get into the actual video. Now, one of the first things that you're going to notice if you enter a tournament, or if you just go to, well, usually in a tournament you won't really see it that much in like casual play, but when you face your opponent, even before you sit down and you see your opponent for the first time, you have a greetings, and you're pretty much always gonna have a greetings. In Japanese, it's just yoroshiku onegaishimasu, which is just essentially like a pleasant to meet you, like let's have a good game. It's like, it's hard to really translate and has like different functions depending on the context that it's used, but in this context, it's essentially like it's pleasant to meet you kind of thing, right? And then you're gonna do that greeting once when you actually meet the opponent, and then actually the other time is, instead of when you flip open your Vanguard, instead of saying stand up the Vanguard, a lot of people will actually just say yoroshiku onegaishimasu, because you're thanking your opponent for the game, like let's have a fun match. It's kind of the meaning that you're giving when you're saying that. So that's the greeting. But the other thing, like this, the greeting you won't really use in the West that much. It's just like a way that, you know, things work. So if you do go to play over there, you're gonna have to use it. But the one thing that really I wish to see more of in the West is the way that they carefully follow the order that the rules state that preparation for a game must be played out in. So for example, when you start the game, both players are going to be shuffling their cards, and they're not just going to draw 5, mulligan, draw 5, and then, you know, then decide who goes first. You're going to shuffle, you're going to both like wait until you can cut each other's decks, then you're going to draw 5 cards face down. Don't look at that, don't you dare put it face up. You leave them face down, and then you're gonna do rock, paper, scissors to decide who goes first, and only then you can mulligan. Because in the end, I'm guilty of this myself, and I'm sure a lot of other people are, or at least you know people that are as well, who will draw their 5 cards and then immediately mulligan and only then decide who goes first. And like, that's not how it's supposed to be, because there are times that you will use different cards whether you're going first or second. As a DB player, this changes a lot of things, whether I have to keep another, you know, maybe try for another grade 3 if I'm going second, or if I can just like YOLO, I don't need anything because I'm going to use Die Hawk kind of thing. So it's just one of those like examples. It's not the most accurate one, but there are obviously differences whether you're going first or second. So it's very strict, and if you don't follow this, you will be stared at, you will be noticed. So you do draw 5 first, then you decide who goes first or second, and then you do your mulligan. The other thing is, always when you mulligan, you should say how many cards you're mulliganing away. So it's like 3 change, 2 change. They say just that. It's like 3 change, 2 change. You can show, if you don't speak Japanese, you can show it with your fingers. Like, that's not a big problem. It just makes it easier for both players to keep track of the state of the game from the very get-go, and that way you're being cooperative with your opponent, and your opponent will do the same for you. Another thing that we don't really do that much in the West, which they do in Japan, and I'm not sure if this would be very useful or not, but they always say names. So not the full thing, not like the whole Purge name, but they will say, I stride into Dragonic Overlord the Purge, something along those lines. Like, they will just say the name for the sake of it. There's nothing wrong with it. It, again, keeps track of the state of the game for both you and your opponent, and that way, you know, you can always ask something. There's space for all of that. And also, like, people will always explain skills. So for example, even I, when I was playing in Japanese tournaments, I always explain my skills. When I go into Die Earth, I say Iconoblast 2, I Persona Blast, and I search my deck for grade 2 and grade 3 dimensional robo and call them. I'll say that while I'm doing the action, so I'm not wasting time as I'm doing the actions, But again, we're keeping pace of the game, we're updating each other on what's going on. In case my opponent doesn't know what the deck does, I will explain it to him. The other way of going about this is if you don't, speak good enough Japanese, or your opponent doesn't speak English, you can just ask them, do you know what this card does? And then they can be like, yes, I do, it's fine, and then you don't have to do anything else. Or if they say, no, can I confirm it? Then you give it to them and they'll read it, and that's it. Because usually you're going to be playing with Japanese cards in the Japanese tournament, so they can actually read it and check it themselves. Another point on that, it's not related to manners, but if you're going to play in the Japanese tournament, most shops will not allow you to use English cards. There are some, like the Shaka Shaka one that I did a video on, you can check that out, I'll put a link in the description. There you can ask and they'll allow you to use English cards, but in a lot of other shops you should ask, and there's not a very high percent chance that you actually get allowed to use English cards because it's actually against the rules, but some shopkeepers are nice enough to allow you to do it. Another thing is to always gesture how much damage you're dealing or receiving. So if your opponent gets a crit, they'll say, they say crit to Vanguard, then you'll say, okay, I will receive 2 damage, and then you do your checks. And then if you're drive checking, you can also say, like, as you split up the crits, you'll say, okay, that's going to be 3 damage. And then you'll say, okay, I will receive 3 damage. And that way you're kind of keeping it up. It's like, it's not super necessary, and that's why in the West we don't really do it, because it's something that, like, it's obviously we know it's happening, but just for the sake of it, in case like judges called or something, you can say that yes, we kept track of the game and we always informed each other of the state, and that's why, you do this in order to keep track of that, as it always comes back to that point. And the final point relating to this sort of like explanation point is that overall the play, it's not slow play, it's just paced out play. It's you call something, you explain what it does, and then you move on. You don't have to explain the skill like if you ride a card that only has a rear guard skill, you're not going to explain it because it doesn't have any use in that exact scenario. But you'll explain cards every time in case there's a timing where you can respond to something, and that way if a judge gets called, you can actually possibly rewind it to that state without going too far off. And I know a lot of Western judges are annoyed by this because a lot of players in the West play too fast, and therefore they cannot rewind the game state, even if it was rewindable at a certain point if they hadn't fast played. But so it's not really slow play, it's just paced out, and that's the part that I think is really strong in Japan, and I think that's what makes running events as a whole a lot more smooth as well, at least from my experience. I know I have some Japanese viewers that might criticize me on these points, but from my 6 months of experience of playing in tournaments basically every week in Japan, this is what I saw. Now after your match, especially in a tournament, you will say thank you, so just like a simple arigatou gozaimashita, like just say thank you for playing the game. Even like when you finish the game, you might ask, your opponent might ask, or you might ask if there's enough time remaining for the round. If you want to play a free round, then you can say yes or no. If not, then you'll probably get away from the table. If your opponent is a little bit salty, then it's probably best not to, but sometimes, like, I've had some opponents that get a bit salty, but then ask them for a free match, and then we start talking for a while, and we become fairly alright friends. So I think it's actually not something you should give up on, and sometimes it's nice to build up these kind of friendships. And if you do, then I really recommend either asking the person if they use Twitter, because in Japan Twitter is very highly used, and most of the Vanguard players are on Twitter. Otherwise you can ask them if they have a line, and then you can always get in touch and become friends, which is part of the whole essence of card games as a whole. And the other basically last thing, which is it's more of a formality in tournaments. This might be something to note for those of you that are tournament organizers, but essentially after you finish a round, you always get a slip. In most shops you get a slip with like both your names, and you have to put a circle around next to the name of the person that won and a cross next to the person that lost. So usually shop tournament organizers will explain this, and they'll say circle is maru and cross is batsu. So that's just like, if you ever hear those words, you'll know what is happening. And finally, just some like very basic points that I think should also be applied in the West, and most places they do. But during the course of a match, you want to be respectful to your opponent. You don't look at your phone, at least unless it's like something super urgent. You should try to avoid looking at your phone. You shouldn't like randomly be talking to your friends around you, especially in English, because that's a little bit disrespectful, because you're taking away from the essence of a match. To this person, every match might be very important, and they might be treasuring the fact that they get to play against a non-Japanese person, and so, you know, by doing that you might be taking away from their experience and turning it into a bad one as well. So those are just some manner points that I noticed throughout my 6 months in Japan. I kind of wanted to make this video mainly because of that, like how paced out the game is in Japan. I really enjoyed playing in shop tournaments because I knew that with every opponent we would have a very smooth like gameplay, because we would both say every single step, we would explain every single skill, and thus it turned into a very smooth experience, and therefore it was a lot more enjoyable even after a long day of classes to come to a tournament and still play until like 10 p.m. because it's this like, it's not really draining because everyone's cooperating to have a good time. And so I think like that sort of, it really is manners, because you have good manners in order to make it a good experience for both of you, and you're not just being quiet and not saying anything and just, you know, just playing it for yourself. You're playing it for the both of you and your opponent. So that's gonna wrap it up for this video on manners in Japan. Let me know what you guys think, which ones you'd actually like to see a bit more of in your local communities, or which ones you actually already have in your local communities. I'm sure there are a few of them, especially I think in the Asian regions. I think some of these do actually go through not just in Japan, so I think that's just something nice to see. And obviously, if you do want to see more of these comparisons between Japanese Vanguard and Western Vanguard, do let me know in the comments. The next one that I plan to do is going to be talking about the community market in Japan, which is like, it sounds kind of basic, but it's actually really different how people sell their cards and buy their cards. So I really want to go over that, but I do want to know if you guys are interested in that or not, because then I'll know if I release that video sooner or if I can delay it if people aren't that interested. So that's going to be it for me today. Don't forget to hit that sexy little bell button in order to stay notified about my uploads, as well as follow me on any social media such as Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, which I don't really use anymore, as well as join the Discord channel if you want to talk to me or other viewers like yourself. So that's going to be it for me today, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.